And this is where things got tough. COVID hit, and quite frankly, to be blunt, it damn near killed the program.
How did that turn into a positive?
Here's what's so cool. She said that to me, "You're saving my life." And I'm like, "I'm just trying to teach."
Welcome to the Studio Session Podcast. Today, we have a special guest, Professor David Barker, the founder and coordinator of the Bachelor's Architecture program at Utah Valley University. Today, I'm excited to talk about David Barker's journey in founding the rigorous but rewarding degree path. I'm Benjamin Varnell, recent graduate of the UVU Bachelor's of Architecture program. I was in cohort 2 with the second group to graduate. I loved my experience there, and I want to give back to the students by recording my journey as well as other students so that we can give advice to future students. Right now, I work as a design technician at Edifice Design Architecture in Bountiful, Utah, and I am preparing for my ARE exams and building up my AXP hours. I want to help the students know the history of the program, and to do that, I had to bring on David Barker. David Barker, how are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you. And thank you, Ben, for taking some of your time and allowing me a chance to chat with you a little bit and catch up.
Yeah, I'm excited. David, could you please introduce yourself a little bit?
Well, David Barker, and I'll kind of introduce myself architecturally, if you will, coming from that background. But I grew up in rural Idaho and had a chance. I didn't think I was going to go to college, and ended up starting out at a community college there in Idaho. And my dad's an engineer, mom's an artist, and I chose engineering at first to make dad happy, but I found architecture quite nice because it pleased both parents. That was kind of the initial ideas of architecture, but I wanted to do something that I wanted to be in something creative, but then something that the communities or people would appreciate. And engineering just wasn't quite a good fit for me. I ended up moving to Salt Lake City, going through architecture there at the University of Utah. I graduated with my master's in '07 from the U, and then started practice. And so '07, '08-ish, was practicing downtown Salt Lake, and had the privilege to work on some great buildings in the Intermountain West. I, college, university, institutional buildings, religious buildings, other varieties. But started getting interested in education as a graduate student at the U, and did some adjunct teaching, some teaching assistant type positions. And then, a position became available in construction management of all places up at BYU, Idaho, up in Rexburg, Idaho, where I grew up. And so my first wife and I wanted to move back to Idaho, and so I applied for that position and got it. It was architectural drafting in a construction management program. And so it was a chance to return home. And I stayed there 3.5 years in that program. We kind of changed it under my influence a little bit to building design and construction. We absorbed interior design, and I kind of grew an architecture component there. And we put a proposal out for a 4-year bachelor's of science in architecture. Didn't get approved by the board of trustees, but a lot of that effort, I think, was well worth the effort. And I enjoyed my time there at BYUI. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about teaching. I learned a lot about myself. And I really, I can't tell my story. I can't introduce myself without talking about the highs and the lows. BYU Idaho was not a good fit for me. It's a faith-based institution, and that's fine. It just wasn't a good fit for me, and my marriage was struggling, and it eventually led to a collapse, a divorce, and so I resigned. I left. We moved back to Utah to try and kind of salvage things, and it didn't work out, and so I ended up following through, uh, with the divorce and kind of trying to restart again. I had applied and was accepted to teach at Davis Tech up in Kaysville, small little applied technology college here in Utah. And that was a great opportunity. I did 10 months there, but at the same time I applied to Davis Tech, I applied to UVU. And Davis Tech immediately responded, and UVU took 10 months to respond to my
Oh,
application. So I took the Davis Tech job, and that got me back into higher ed down here in Utah. And in the meantime, in the background, personal life is falling apart, and I'm trying to figure out how to keep a career going and make money. And it was really extremely difficult point in my life. Pretty much lost everything, but at the same time, learned a lot about myself, if you will. And UVU called. I interviewed with UVU the same day I signed divorce papers. It was a huge mix of emotions that day. I was trying to be on top of the world, interviewing with these faculty members at a 4-year institution, and then in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, "Gosh, I gotta end 16 years of marriage and move out of my house and all this." So it was a lot emotionally, but I got accepted at UVU to teach and architectural drafting, and moved into a little condo near the school, and kind of started life part two, right?
right.
Uh, Late 30s and life part two, and the first 2.5 years, 3 years at UVU were establishing a foundation, drafting Revit, 3D modeling, AutoCAD, architectural rendering. Um, we did a few special topics classes where I did some design build projects with the students. And then it was late 2017, early 2018. And I was walking down the hall at UVU and I passed the new dean. And I said, "Hey, uh, Dean Mulvaney, it's a pleasure to meet you. Congratulations on the new appointment. Great to have you here." I was probably doing a little kiss up because I was a young faculty, And anyways, he looked at me and he's like, "Dave Barker, right? Architecture, right?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "What's your thoughts on starting a full architecture program at UVU?" And I was kind of taken aback. I kind of looked kind of at my history and I said, "Well, I tried this at BYU Idaho and it kind of got kicked in the teeth." But I said, quite frankly, I said, "It'll be a lot of work, but I've done a lot of work on it already. I can repurpose that." I do strongly feel Utah needs another option for architecture, not to discredit the University of Utah whatsoever. But they needed another option. There's a lot of students that want a pathway to architecture. UVU has an extremely affordable tuition. We had the space. We had the capability. I think all of the pieces were in place. And so I said, "If you'll give me permission, I'll attack it." I will attack it like a bloodhound. I will go crazy on it. And right there on the fly, he said, make it so. Let's see what you can do. And so as a young faculty, back of my mind, I lost everything. This is a chance to prove myself. Let's give it 150%. And dove into the deep end. We did surveys, industry surveys. I did industry surveys from Nevada, California, Utah, Colorado, um, and there was this just overwhelming response of, if you can make it happen, make it happen. I surveyed hundreds of students, and we collected all that data, and I delivered it. I delivered a proposed curriculum, and it got approved. Now, I didn't know the direction of what the architecture program should be, and in the back of my head, I just kept having this thought, like, the world doesn't need another architecture program that's like everything else. It needs something a little bit different, a different approach, a different take on it. That's what it needs. And strangely enough, I had a student by the name of Sam. I still remember him, and he was a mechatronics major at UVU, and he took my rendering class for an elective, okay, to get the GE requirement. And he said he knows this guy called Corey Strange, who is part of the Institute of Classical Art and Architecture, who knows Paul Monson, who is the president of the Institute of Classical Art and Architecture. This is early 2018. And he said, you ought to give these guys a call. They got a lot of knowledge. And so I reached out to Paul, and then Paul invited me to a meeting in Salt Lake. I ran up, and we sat down to a lovely dinner, and he just started saying, you ought to think about a classical approach. And I'm like, oh, whatever. That's old stuff. I don't know, Paul. And he's like, no, seriously, you ought to take a look at it. It would set you apart. Notre Dame's the only one doing it.
Mhm.
Colorado's doing a little bit. A couple others are dabbling in it, but you ought to take a look at it. It would really set you apart. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And Paul sends me all expense paid trip, me and my wife. I got remarried, and he sends us to Colorado, UC Denver. And we meet with this gentleman over there who is a classicist. And he sits us down with the ICAA, and we go through a workshop on the Tuscan order, laying out proportion, laying out a temple facade, and I am just like captivated. I'm like, this is it. It makes sense. It's not wandering around in the dark trying to BS your way through some abstract design concept. It is the real deal. And it can be applied to contemporary architecture of our day, but we're following these rules, these guidelines, right? That are centuries old. That I'm just fascinated by it. And it brought me back to my youth, where I used to watch This Old House with my dad. And I used to, help my grandpa out on architectural millwork jobs, finished carpentry jobs. And my grandpa was a classicist in a lot of ways, because he would go into these old houses and try and match their interiors. And so it just brought it all back, and I was just captivated by it. And my wife, Lindsay, and I were driving back from Denver back to Utah, 8-hour drive.
Hmm.
And we just started mapping it out. Like, we're going to do this class. We're going to do this class. Studio 1's going to be like this. Studio 2 is going to be like this. And we just started writing it out on paper. Studio 1, okay, we're going to learn about the art of architecture. Studio 2, let's do a house. Studio 3, let's get into small commercial. Boom, 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 all the way through. And we just started mapping it out. And Paul was instrumental in all of that. He was a shadow figure, if you will, right? He wasn't employed at UVU. He was just there helping me. And of course, now he is the program coordinator. But Um, so a lot of the founding of it goes to Paul. And we got accepted to hire 2 faculty. I got
Hmm.
approved to hire 2. And so we put some ads out. I wrote them up and we put some ads out and Paul reached out to Brandon Rowe and Brandon applied for the position. And I do need to give credit to Brandon. Brandon is one of the most tenacious people I know. He sat down and essentially wrote every assignment for every studio from scratch.
Wow.
He worked himself to the point of illness, right? And that's the truth. He got himself sick. He worked himself so hard.
He did. Yeah.
Yeah, and you were there, you know. I mean, Brandon had to have many doctor's visits because he couldn't slow down, right? Um, One of the closest friends I have. Both Brandon and Paul are very, very close. I could not have done it without them. Um, we Before Brandon and Marika was one of our other first faculty, and she did a lot as well. She ended up moving off to University of Memphis, I believe. Uh, better fit for her, and we're happy she's doing what she's excelling over there. Still keep in touch with her, still follow her. But we started to put together a preliminary, like, I knew we needed to have like this acceptance to the cohort 1 thing, right? We need to have like an application.
Yeah.
And so we kind of came up with this. It was just me. Brandon hadn't showed up yet. Marika hadn't showed up yet. So I was like, okay, I got to figure out how to formally accept students into this program. And so I put together this kind of rough, application criteria and a portfolio criteria. And we accepted 18. In fact, 18 applied and we accepted 18. I was begging people to apply.
And how did you find those people? Where'd they come
Well,
from?
some of it was begging them. Some of them was begging them, like, hey, you should apply. So we did beg on some. And I marketed to Salt Lake Community College. I marketed to BYU, Idaho. I marketed to a couple others, and we siphoned off a couple from those schools to come down. Brighton, uh, Waterland, Ayers, right now. Of course, she got married. She was a Salt Lake Community College student. And I mean, my hat's off to her. She had 3 kids through this program. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And that girl worked herself to the very end, and congratulations to her for finishing strong with a family. And huge kudos to her husband who helped her through all that. Right. But that initial 18 whittled down to 11 after, that startup drama that happened. We just were trying to just do it. And we had a couple of hiccups going.
Initially, you had a vision to uh, start this program that was technology focused, and that was probably direction from the dean, as UVU is really highly focused on um, evolving with technology.
Yeah.
And then you met Paul Monson, and you introduced more classical traditional methods of teaching and integrated that into this vision that UVU had. So how did that have to evolve as you mix those 2 elements together?
Well, this is where you have to stand up for what you believe in. The dean, he, to his credit, he really tried hard to help me get this program started. It was under the understanding that we would push technology to the limits, and we would eventually move it towards AI and all this crazy, newfangled stuff. And he was an engineer, and he was starting engineering programs at the same time that were highly technology driven. And all of a sudden, he sees me in the background going backwards in time, And he's like, what in the heck is this guy doing? Right? This guy's drawing with pencils. This guy's studying stuff from 2000 years ago and doesn't seem to really care about the forefront of the very edge of the wave, right? That got me into a couple of arguments with the dean. And luckily, I was approaching tenure, and I was getting a little bit more bold in my belief system, and I was studying classicism crazy so I could at least talk the talk. And you got to understand, I was trained very modernist
Hmm.
at the U. And while we studied classicism, it was in it from a historical context only.
Hmm.
So, and I'm very technological, pretty savvy, I would think. I did all the 3D modeling, I did all the Revit stuff. I was pushing all of that pretty good. That's what put food on my plate for years. And so to suddenly kind of start backtracking, and in that year or so of trying to get the architecture program launched, I became very well aware that some of the best technology has already been discovered, right? And we need to embrace the best technologies, the best designs. And that's kind of been my ethos, if you will. Nothing's better than a pencil.
Hmm.
Nothing.
Hmm.
Nothing's better than pen and ink to communicate, right? Like when I'm sketching like that right there, I can't point in the right direction. That,
That's
right?
that's it.
Nothing communicates better. I could 3D model that, but that pen and ink drawing there is really very powerful. And so I kind of just started to just say to myself, let's explore the best of the best throughout all periods of time. And I still appreciate many points of modernism. I love the arts and crafts period, but classicism has so many truths, mathematical truths embedded in it. It's just an eye opener. It helps you. If you study classicism, you understand how the universe works. Whereas my training in architecture was kind of more of a wandering in the darkness, trying to find answers, but not really, you know, being grounded on much other than just somebody's opinions, right? But more traditional based design and classical design, it just makes sense. And you can see it in everything. You can see it in furniture, which is my passion. You can see it in nature, um, and you replicate it. And I think that really exploits the creator in us, which is what we all try to do as architects and builders.
I totally agree. I first met you, David, when I was walking through the halls trying to figure out what I was wanting to do for my education, and I kind of had this direction that I feel like I was going to go to UVU, and then off to U of U to do architecture. And I found out from President Tumenes that I needed to talk to David Barker, and I did. I tried to find you. It was hard, all the way at the very tippity top of UVU,
Yeah.
seventh floor of the CS building.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you were busy. You were about to go teach a class, and you told me come to this lecture. And it was like a couple of days from then, and it was about classical architecture, how to draw the Doric order, the Tuscan order, and the Corinthian order. It was like 3 days long,
Yeah,
and
it was intense.
I was just thrust into this totally different environment. I thought architecture was about drawing in CAD and extruding objects and putting up construction documents and selling them and repeat. And I learned that day that there was a kind of organization behind everything that fascinated me. And that's what you just talked about. And that's what hooked me into learning about classical architecture and dedicating myself to 5 years in at UVU. You and Brandon and Paul and other teachers were putting a significant amount of effort into making this program a reality and becoming an accredited program. And I'd like to talk for you to talk about some of those significant obstacles that you encountered in that accreditation process.
I sure remember the first workshop you attended, and you were like on the front row. And I was like, wow, this guy's awesome. I just found him in the hallway and he's here. This is so cool. Those workshops really were transformational and a lot of fun. Um, and they really did convince people of many things, myself included. You know, of all the things I've tried to do in life, man, accreditation is up there with one of the hardest. I, we got it through Board of Trustees, which is the state of Utah, those overseeing education in Utah. We got it through, well, that's Board of Regents, and then we got it through Board of Trustees, and that's great. We got it through curriculum. I had to write all the syllabi, essentially, and the student outcomes. And we got it through all of that. We got it on the schedule. We got it registered so students could take classes. So bam, we did all that. I did all that solo. That was a lot of late nights. Uh, you know, Kick on Lord of the Rings and go for it for 7 hours
Right.
every night. But, and then of course it was, okay, we've got this monster beast called accreditation. And I knew that this was going to be a huge hurdle, which that was 2019, and it is still happening in 2024. We are still pursuing accreditation for that program. But the very first one was called initial candidacy. And it was just to basically make them aware of who we were and write up a 70-page report. I really wish ChatGPT was around back then. And I am not, I can write okay. That was, wow, that took a lot.
I've
I
read through the
wrote,
document. It is truly extensive.
it's a brutal, yeah, it was brutal. I wrote a lot of it. Brandon wrote a lot of it. Marika wrote a lot of it. And kudos to her. She was here with us for a year and she wrote a good amount of the initial accreditation, initial candidacy report, 2019. I still have the dang thing. Just as a reminder. And anyways, we sent that off to NAB, the accrediting body, and they reviewed it. We had a meeting with them. It was through Zoom, and which was kind of nice. And they pointed out um, these issues, but they said, "Looks like you're okay. Looks like you're okay, but you're going to have to delay a year." And because you're trying to fast track it, you're going to have to delay a year. And so, mistake number one, I told the students that they could graduate in 2021 and still be under the umbrella of accreditation. And really, the first cohort didn't graduate until 2020. I think it was 2023. And that upset the masses big time. It was bad. It was bad. Some of them immediately quit. Some of them called me a liar. And it was just like, gosh, wasn't trying to, pull the wool over your eyes here, but we just, we're kind of rolling with the punches ourselves. And so we had one of those kind of really not comfortable meetings. That whittled off 6 or 7 really fast. And then we were kind of left with 12 or 13.
Mhm.
And so that was kind of a good lesson. Then I went to New Orleans with Dean Mulvaney, and a year later we had a kind of our initial accreditation paperwork due. So initial candidacy approved, initial accreditation, that one was next. And this is where things got tough. But we submitted it, and then They were very polite. They were very good to us, but they said you have 23 areas of concern.
Mhm.
Now, this is where the dean and I really butted heads, but he was an engineer and ABET accreditation. If you have that many areas of concern, you're not going to get accredited. But it's a different process. And he was very familiar with it. And I told him we had 23 areas of concern, and he basically says, "You're fired." And I was like, "Wait, what?" And we've got 5 years to work on these 23 areas, not this is the end of the line. And
Mhm.
he just wouldn't see past that. And so we really started at that point, kind of really bumping into each other. And I had already gotten tenure at that point. So I was just like, okay, it's time to go full on rogue. And I started just doing things for the program to make sure that the program would survive.
And during this
COVID
time,
too.
COVID happened, right?
Yeah, COVID hit. And quite frankly, to be blunt, it damn near killed the program.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
I was in Texas, March 2020. I got the call, get back home. We're shutting everything down. And we got in the truck, drove straight through, bought $300 worth of groceries in Lubbock, Texas, because we didn't know what was going to happen.
Mhm.
And they pretty much shut it down. Now here's where COVID became a huge blessing to us. Huge blessing. Um, they shut down the school. There was parking everywhere. There was no cars on the freeway. The school was empty. We were told not to come in the buildings. You were going to die, right? Or you were going to get sick. And anyways, we did that spring 2020. We followed through. Summer was kind of, we don't know what's going to happen. And then they said fall, everything's going to be online. And I pretty much put my foot down and said, studios required face to face. No ifs, ands, or buts. No ifs, ands, or buts. And they said full masks and everybody must show, vaccination. And anyways, not to get into all that. It was such a weird time in history, but
Totally was. As a student,
oh yeah.
it was like, it was great.
Oh,
I had a lot of parking. It was amazing.
yeah.
First time I could just show up right on time, not
It was
worry about
wonderful.
parking. It was great.
Yeah.
And then I was just so grateful that you were uh, adamant that we stay uh, in working in studio in person and
Yeah.
working with our hands, and would have been incredibly difficult to do looking back on it if we were online.
That one cost me some serious political capital. I burned some bridges with that. I pretty much was yelling and screaming at some points to some administrators, but
How did that turn into a positive?
here's what's so cool about it. Nobody was in the buildings. And so we're all stuffed in this room wearing masks, trying to stay 6 feet apart from each other. And I'm walking around all the classrooms that are empty. And I'm like, there's nobody here. We have 15 students and 15,000 square feet. And so I just started moving students into all these different classrooms. And what was cool about it was we had ultimate separation. We were there physically. Everybody had a lot of space to work. And then that's how we started taking over classrooms, so that's how we have 5 classrooms up there, is because of COVID. Because we just said, well, we need these classrooms in the future. We have more students coming. We have more applicants coming. We have to have this space. And that's how we were able to procure all that space. It was,
And then there was like less students coming to
yeah,
school in general because
yeah,
they realized they can do it from home.
yeah. And so, but we kept telling our students, you have to be here for studio. You have to be here for studio. You have to be here for studio. And, we were all masked up,
Mhm.
per protocol. And according to the science at the time, we were doing what we could to try and be safe. But that's how we procure all those classrooms. And and nobody was there. No administrators came on campus. Nobody was checking us. No security was on campus. And I was talking to a student, and her and I sat down and we were chatting, and she said, architecture school at UVU is all I have. You're the only people I interact with. You're saving my life. She said that to me. You're saving my life. And I'm like, I'm just trying to teach, you know. And she's a dear friend of mine now. She's graduated and she's doing well, thriving. But that was such a dark period in history. People really were harming themselves, killing themselves. And because we chose to stay together, we helped each other through that. We really did. And we kept telling each other we're a community, we're working through all this stuff. We have assignments, we have something to work towards. We have a brighter future to work towards. And I think COVID was one of the biggest blessings of the architecture program. In fact, the latest accreditation visit, they brought it up. How did you guys work through COVID? All the other schools closed down.
Wow.
How did you guys work through it? And they said, well, Dave Barker was such a bullheaded row pusher. He forced everybody to keep having classes regardless of the outcome, regardless of the consequences. And I felt deep in my heart, we have to stay coming. And there's nobody in this building, so what does it matter? We have to stay here. So that was one of the biggest blessings of the program.
The success of the program definitely depended on these outside forces that were saying we need more teachers, but we also need more students to have more teachers, and we need more space to have all of those too. And all those came together real well, but also not necessarily enough for a while. And we had a lot of growing pains as well as successes. Tell us the story about how you acquired Alan Greenberg's library and what made you realize it was important enough to go get it.
Well, Paul hadn't been hired yet. Paul was still working for the LDS Church as an architect. But Paul gave me a call and he's like, okay, Dave, something big just happened. But I got a call from somebody who told me Alan Greenberg, who very prominent architect back east in Alexandria, is retiring and shutting his offices, and he has a 5,000 plus book, collection, some of the greats. And he wants to donate it to a university. And he's made some inquiries and they've all turned him down. And he's been made aware of Utah Valley University and their new program. I mean, we were a year old.
Right.
I'm a nobody. I'm really a nobody. I grew up in Idaho. Potatoes. Right? I haven't really done any great architectural works. I've worked on great projects as a drafter, as a team player, but I got nothing under my name. I'm really a nobody. And next thing, Paul's like, you need to call Alan. I'm like, you mean, this is the guy that did some work for Ronald Reagan. This is one of the best. And I start really diving deep into who Alan Greenberg is. I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's like one of the best. And so I call Alan. And I'm like, my heart's a thumping pretty hard. Like, he's a legend. He's in his 80s. This guy's a legend. And he's done some of the greatest classical contemporary works out there. And little old, nobody me is giving him a call. August 2020. So we're still deep in
the beginning of
COVID. That's right. I mean, it's bad. And Alan says to me over the phone, tell me about your program, Dave. Okay. So I start laying it out like, okay, we're classical program and, we're sponsored and funded a lot by the ICAA and I'm just starting, I'm the program coordinator, kind of got thrown into this. And And he says, well, you sound like the kind of guy that's going to follow through. And I'm not going to just give this to anybody. And I'm not going to give it to you unless you come get it. And so I call up, administration downstairs, provost, and I'm like, hey, I got this thing. This guy wants to donate $300,000 worth of books to the school. And they're like, that's great. That's great. Yeah, let's make it happen. Let's get him on a Zoom meeting and let's make it happen. And I'm like, he doesn't want to do Zoom. He wants me to come out there and make it happen. And they're like, nope, not going to.
Really?
No travel. No travel. Travel's banned. You're going to get a virus and you're going to bring it back and you're going to affect the whole school. That
Right,
kind of
right,
thing.
right, right.
Like, not going to happen. And I'm like, this is one of the most comprehensive rare book collections in the country. I mean, many of these books belong in the Smithsonian. Some of them are 300 years old.
Right. Yeah. They're
A
incredible.
a huge collection of works. And he wants to donate it to UVU. And I'm like, this is going to hurt. But myself, Brandon, Paul, we started making calls. And Brandon was able to bring in some money through his contacts. I was able to bring in some money through architects on my end. Paul knows some very great donors. And we got together about $20,000. I flew out against every rule on my own dime. I flew out and I got to just say, by the way, Sid Smith, who's still employed at UVU, he gave me $50 of his own money.
I love
He's
that
like,
guy.
that's all I got. Go get yourself a dinner. And I was like, dude, you rock. So this one's to Sid, who I just adore. What a guy.
Hmm.
But anyways, so Lindsay and I flew out to DC December 2020, right after that fall semester, and met with Alan. I interviewed Alan for 2 hours. I still have those videos. I sat in his offices. Lindsay sat in his offices. And we hired a moving company and we helped him pack up every book. We pulled stuff off the dumpster. Plasters, plaster casts of column capitals, plaster casts, rosettes, samples, all sorts of
From the
stuff.
White House, of no less.
The White House ones, yes. I'm just like, he's like, I'm just going to throw these away. I'm like, are you kidding me? He's like, well, if you want them. Anyways, we hired a moving company. They took it to a train and we shipped it across the country. What an amazing moment in time. I got to walk Alan Greenberg down the stairs and out the door of his own office for the last time.
Wow.
I still, 5 years later, I had that opportunity, and he talked about, just take me out to my Mini Cooper. I still like to zoom around in it a little bit. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you are the coolest guy ever. What a dude. And, he just kept giving, here's some plans. Here's, here's some more wood samples. Here's all of this. Just take it. Take it. My kids don't want it. I can't find anybody that wants it. Please take it. We boxed up everything. I had my hands on just about every book, put it in a box. Looking at them, thinking the treasure chest that is going to build a major foundation for UVU. It just blew me away. I broke every rule in the book to go to Alexandria and DC during that time. And got chewed out pretty hard when I got back. Like, what were you thinking? You need to quarantine for like forever. um, And just one little highlight, because I've been to DC a couple times, but Lindsay hadn't.
Mhm.
Alan said the greatest building in America is the Lincoln Memorial. Go visit it. And so that evening, after packing up his office, we took um, a subway over to the mall and got out, and we walked half the length of the mall from the Washington Memorial down to the Lincoln Memorial alone. Nobody was there.
Mhm.
And we got to the Lincoln Memorial. Nobody was there. And we stood there and we just felt like we were in the shoes of giants. I mean, the history, you know, the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, everything, the perfection of architectural design, the craftsmanship. I'm sitting there just looking at the stonework all alone. It was just outstanding. It was just so amazing.
Why was it so amazing?
It was just surreal. You show me another period in time when you're the only person standing at the Lincoln Memorial, you
Right.
know? I still look at those pictures like we were there during the darkness of COVID,
Mhm. Mhm.
reveling in the glory of mankind, the accomplishments of mankind. I mean, little old us. I mean, Lindsay came out of humble circumstances in Utah and Texas, and me and potatoes, you know, no greatness here, but we're standing with, you could just kind of just feel it, in all of that darkness. And that monument was lighted up, and the lightness of it gave us hope for better days to come. And we broke a lot of rules to get there during that time. That was fun. And I couldn't have done it without the help of Paul, obviously, who kind of got the whole thing put together, Brandon's efforts, and I was just the one who was probably stupid enough to, okay, I'll go. I'll break the rule. But it was fun. And we got that library back, and it sat in boxes for 3 years before we finally got approvals. I was after I left UVU. I
Right.
still was like, come on,
Right.
guys, get these books on shelves. And now, yeah, they finally got them on shelves, and it looks beautiful. It's amazing. And the students have full access to it.
It is amazing. I found it extremely useful when we did to get those on the shelves, and I had my first project that I really needed resources for ancient drawings of Greek buildings. And I had the wealth of the original copies of these books that are like hand etched
Yeah. Right
and
there. You're not
printed.
Googling something,
And they're on these big sheets, the original larger sheets. And what an extreme resource. I think if I could have picked up one of those books in that library and just studied that, and even like just tried to mimic any of the drawings in that book, then I would have had all the skills I needed for a really fulfilling career.
I hope so. We're at a period of time, I think, when nobody really opens a book. I'm at Snow College, and I just can't seem to get my students to crack a book open. And one of my favorite things to do every evening, every morning, I start a fire in the cold months, and I get a cup of coffee, and I read something for a half an hour just to kind of get the day going. And then in the evenings, I like to pull off a book or two off the shelf and trying to build up my own little library, but you know, try and learn something from those that came before. And maybe it's because I'm middle aged and I value it more, but There is so much knowledge out there. And, the greats, the Michelangelos, the Brunelleschis, the oh, the very many. I love Vitruvius. I love to read him.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I have my woodworking heroes that I just adore. Uh, you know, um, read what they discovered, and they will enrich your lives. We have so many distractions nowadays, right? I can go to my phone and be entertained for hours.
Right.
Netflix, my gosh, anything like that can just absorb all of our time. And time is the most valuable commodity. Use it wisely, and you will be rewarded richly. That's my feelings.
I agree. Time is pivotal towards our education and especially mine. I found that the program stretched me in many ways that made me realize I had to balance way more than I thought and strip away all of the things that distracted me so that I could do the things that I wanted, which is to graduate.
Yeah, cohort one, we tried so hard, we made so many mistakes, and they got through, and they learned a lot. And I think they had a great experience overall. Um, but boy, we sure, they were the guinea pigs. Let's try this and see how they react, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Um, cohort two, we were like, okay, we're getting it figured out. We're doing a lot better. We've done this once.
Yeah.
Let's try and some of it. Uh, and of course, the others have come, and I think it's getting more and more dialed in, and it's a well-oiled machine. But just look at the study abroad component, which you've been able to participate on. Wow. I mean, you know, we don't get those kind of opportunities to travel to such culturally rich locations very often. And then, the faculty we've been able to hire. In fact, Aliki, we interviewed her during COVID, and she's in a mask. I'm in a mask. Brandon's in a mask. We're all sitting there. I can't see anybody but eyeballs. And I'm trying to interview her. And I told Brandon, I was like, I don't like her. No, I don't want her. I don't want to deal with it. I did. I was like, I don't want to deal with her. And he's like, well, she's really, really smart, David. And she has a really, really, really good resume. And I'm like, I don't want to deal with her. I don't want her. And she'll probably listen to this and start laughing. But anyway, um, we interviewed her again. That was the first interview. And I was like, no, my gut tells me no. And Brandon kind of was just like, okay, David, just, kind of really try and be open here and listen to her. And we brought her back in again, and she really, really hit all the right buttons and the potentials, right? I mean, it was like, okay, we are talking about going international if we bring on Aliki. I mean, what do I got culturally? My background from Idaho, studying here in Utah, working on a few projects. Brandon was quite educated, with his background, from Catholic University and growing up in California and other locations. But Aliki took us international, and best hire ever.
I agree.
I mean, my gosh, the connections to the Greek culture, the depth, the history, the understanding of it all, I was blown away. Like, man, I had to cut my pride down 1,000% because she's the jewel. She is the jewel of that program. She is.
She is. I agree. I took her first class at UVU, and there were 6 students because no one really just knew what the
Yeah.
opportunity that was before us. And I remember walking up to Leaky and saying, "Why should I take your course?"
Yeah.
She's really bold and she doesn't mind people challenging her. And in fact, she
Yeah.
thrives in that. And she told me, you need to take my course and we're going to learn everything from the Minoans all the way to Roman architecture. And in fact, if you don't take my course, you're not going to learn about classical architecture really. And I was like, is there going to be a lot of homework? And she's like, no, it'll be fine. We'll do everything in class. She was an amazing teacher. And I felt like I learned everything I needed to going forward to prepare me for the rest of my time at UVU.
Wow. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
incredible history. And that eventually led me to go into the study abroad because I knew how many connections she had, as well as how much she knew in general about the history we were going to go walk into.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Aliki is a pivotal
Oh, yeah.
professor.
Yeah. I hope she takes care of herself because she's so passionate, right? Um, and she pours so much effort into the students. It's all for love. She just wants to pass it all on as much as she possibly can. What an amazing lady. I'm just privileged to have known her. I'm like, what an amazing lady. So,
So, could you share reinforced your passion for teaching architecture and why you kept going through the hard times?
well, you know, maybe it was because I experienced some low things in my life. Um, I always wanted to, I always wanted to teach better than the way I was taught. Not to say that many of the professors I had didn't do their best, but I also had some that just were there delivering the same old, same old. And I felt disenfranchised. I was really excited about college. And then I get into these grad school classes that are being led by a student aide. And the teacher whom I really wanted to get to know was in his office, locked in an office, writing a book, right? Because he didn't want to be bothered with teaching. And I was really disgusted by that. Um, Not all the teachers did that, but a few of them did. And I thought, gosh, that's the class I really wanted to take. And now I'm being taught by a grad student, not cool. And so that's why I got into teaching. And I've been doing it for, gosh, 18 years. And, at various institutions. What keeps me going, and even to this day, because I still lose faith. But it's people like you. But when the light bulb kicks on and you can help somebody achieve what they can become, right? Their greatness. I can just start naming names. Hunter Huffman. Wow. Tressa Messenger. Wow. Um, my wife, Lindsay Barker. I mean, I met her in an office and then she was going to go to the U. And then, I was just doing some summer work to try and pay the bills. And they sat me next to Lindsay. And then, um, Lindsay and I got married. And then she's like, I'm going to go to architecture school. And I'm like, please don't. And she's teaching adjunct and she is leading out classes and she is fighting some of the same kind of fights I did to try and grow a program and do things. I have a student right now at Snow College who wants to be a woodshop teacher when he grows up. 19-year-old kid. And you can see the fire. So it's really, that percentage of students, you know, that cohort one, I don't care. All of them. Cohort one, I love those guys. Cohort two, yeah, because we did it all together, right? We did all of that together. We fought like crazy day in and day out to make it work. All those guys. A few from cohort 3 that I still stay in touch with, and then, of course, I don't know much of the rest, but it's the students. I still have friendships from clear back when I was teaching at BYU, Idaho. A couple of them I still stay in touch with, you know? That's why I enjoy teaching is the relationships, the chance to watch somebody make an awesome life, and you got to be a small part of it, you know? Yeah, I mean, I was in your life, a small percentage, just in the right place at the right time, you know, and that gives me a lot of happiness to see. And it's like, wow, you work at Edifice? I'm jealous. I wish I worked at Edifice. You know, I mean, you guys do cool stuff, right? Yeah, all over the country, you have opportunities. All over the world, you have opportunities. If you want them, go get them. And, I think higher ed's at a crossroads. It really is. There is so much entitlement built in and even encouraged, if I may, uh, especially in the last 5 years. And I'll just tell my students, look, you can have all these handout programs and all of this caring that you want, but in the end, it really does come down to your ethic, your hard work ethic. It really does. You have to put the rubber to the road. You can get carried a little bit. You can get supported a little bit, and you may graduate, but really it comes down to how hungry are you? And are you gonna go get it? And, that's why I'm so grateful for my journey. I've had a lot of great, awesome, amazing highs. I mean, I got a great, fun, cool story of my own life, and then I've had some pretty rough lows, but I dug myself out of the bottom, of the barrel, like there was nothing else down there. The food was gone. You know? In 2015, I was divorced. In 2016, I hiked over 15 mountains above 12,000 feet. And that was like a very spiritual journey. Like I got on top of Mount Whitney, highest in the lower 48, alone, silence, top of the United States. A lot of thinking goes on when you've hiked 22 miles in one day, right? A lot of personal, who am I? And I think we all need to figure that out. And architecture school is a great, at least at UVU, it is a great crucible for figuring out who you are.
It's a forge,
It is.
the refining fire.
Uh-huh. Because you're going to figure out if you're going to stay in bed and say, screw it, or I'm going to get my butt out of bed and I'm not ready. I'm not ready for today's presentation, but I am going to do it anyway. And I'm going to buck up and I'm going to do it, right? That is character defining stuff. You may never be the greatest architect in the world, and it doesn't matter. You are going to be a great person walking a program if you can make it. You are going to be tough as nails, and you're going to be able to handle anything. That's my thoughts.
We are surrounded by uh, this crazy phenomenon, which is AI right now. Everybody
Yeah,
seems hyper focused on it. Everybody wants to know what's going to happen.
yeah.
Um, what's your feelings about AI and the realm of architecture and education?
Use the best tools, right? You have to embrace it. I I subscribe to, and if I may, I'll grab something, right? Just going to grab something off my shelf here. It's one of the best tools. Nothing is better, right? I don't care if it's 1860 or if it's 2024. It's one of the best tools for what it does, right? And this is extremely manual. Um, this tool is one of the best tools. If you really, this is my thoughts, and it works for me. You know, I do woodworking and I love hand tool woodwork. At Snow College, I was asked to develop a CNC or a computer controlled woodworking curriculum, right? So essentially robotics in woodworking. I'm a computer programmer for woodworking. I develop 3D models, I tool path, and I tell the machine what to do, and it does it. And I was very opposed to that at first. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to break up my whole foundational philosophy of hand tool woodworking. Right? I'm a huge proponent, so know its limitations. Because I've invested enough time to find out here's what it's really good at. It's good at pumping out a lot of stuff over and over and over. I mean, I'm building 8 trestle tables for the school. I mean, each of them have 25 parts. They're very complicated tables, and we're doing them all on the CNC. I could not push out that many to that same level of quality. And so artificial intelligence, while it's scary, it makes me question a lot of things about Terminator 2, Judgment Day. um, I think we need to know it because somebody else is going to figure it out, right? Another country, uh, bad people, they're going to do it. We have to stay at the forefront and figure it out, but hold on to our traditional values. I'm a chapter president for the Society of American Period Furniture Makers, the ICAA for woodwork. These guys are all old timers that want to stay in 1880, 1820, doing hand tooled woodworking and perfecting their craft. I love it. I love it. A huge amount of knowledge shows up and says, hey, I'd like to kind of become a chapter lead in Utah for your society. And I'm pretty good at CNC, and I just can hear the groans in the background. I'm like, hear me out, guys. Hear me out. How many houses do we have in America that are, colonial era? How many? Millions. How many of those need to be remodeled, restored, rejuvenated? What about new architecture today that needs to mimic that, right? Or historical context, right? You think we're going to make all this stuff by hand? You think that the next generation is going to be able to use these tools because there's no training in them anymore? There's, how to use this. I can think of about 3 schools in the country teaching how to use this. And I just said, hear me out. What if we trained ourselves in classicism, but used modern tools to fabricate parts? Don't you think that's a good idea? Balusters. We could fabricate newel posts. We could fabricate porch elements. We need to find a way to use modern day tools to generate historical details. Otherwise, the historical elements of society will be wiped out and we'll just build new stuff trained in the old ways, the old methods, unless they're getting taught by a craftsman. And so I would say, let's find ways to, this is what I love about UVU's program. And I think the mission statement's pretty much we learn from our past to inform our future. Right. Craftsmen of old had access to a table saw, darn well they would have used it. If they had access to a CNC, darn well they would have used it. Absolutely. And we are products of we're living in this moment in history. All of these things are starting to happen. Let's find ways to utilize them, but remember our past.
Thank you, David. I think you've brought a lot of value with your insights and your experience, especially to the future students here that are attending UVU or other architecture programs around the world. And I hope that you have a really great experience growing that program over at Snow College, and know that we all value your efforts over at UVU, and especially with the reminder of the libraries. To you, all those listeners, thank you. And please thank David for all his efforts at UVU, and hope that you kind of remember the efforts that were put into creating this program. It wasn't easy, and that it is to be valued. And we'll hope you listen our next podcast. David mentioned one of our other guests, Brighton Ayers, a mother that survived architecture program. And tune into that podcast. I think this will be episode 3.